Welcome to the Medium in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie, the medium in the middle. This podcast is going to walk you through my journey into mediumship and how I came to realize that I could communicate with souls that have passed over. My adventure started just over a year ago when unusual situations started happening to me. It wasn't until I really started to pay attention to them that it all started to come together. I wrote down everything that I was experiencing this past year in a little black book, and this podcast is going to be a recap of all of those memories leading up to where I am today in my mediumship journey. I will be releasing new episodes every Tuesday, and I recommend listening to the podcast in order, starting with episode 1, as my story will unfold more week by week. If you would like to stay connected with me, follow me on Instagram at mediuminthemiddle. Hello everyone, we're back. I'm back. It's 2020. Happy New Year. I hope everybody had an amazing holiday season. I am so excited for the new year. There are so many things happening, so many things planned, so many things I want to do and accomplish. I am a big write out your goals type of person. I've mentioned this before. I used to work for Lululemon and we used to do goal setting all the time. And they taught us how to do goal setting and they taught us how to attach a timeline to it to make sure that you actually do it. So now, before the new year ends, I like to go back and do a year in review. And I look at each month and what I accomplished each month. And then I write out goals for the new year. And one of my biggest goals for this year is that I want to grow this podcast even more. I know I need to invest more time and I just need to get real with it. So I'm going to be doing a lot of work on this. I'm very excited that you are all still listening to my journey. Episode 19. This is so good. So exciting things happening in 2020. I will keep you posted. I'm going to have some guests on the show this year. I'm definitely going to be bringing on my friend that I talked about who went to the graveyard with me. I've been invited to go on other podcasts, which is so cool. So cool. So before I started today's podcast episode, I wanted to pull a card. I don't talk about cards a lot on the show, if I've talked about them at all, but I do like to use tarot cards and oracle cards. It's not a service that I offer. I just do it for friends or if someone asks or needs something. So I like to pull cards just to ask the universe what I need to know for the day. So I actually got the deck that I'm using today from when I did my Reiki Masters course again this past October. For the course, my Reiki Master brought in a client, I guess you could say, and I was meant to practice on her while she watched me and gave feedback. So after the treatment, she was so happy with my treatment and she felt so good and she wasn't expecting, I think, what happened to happen. So she went up and she got me this deck of cards and I've been using them. They are by Colette Baron Reed and it's called the Enchanted Map. They're oracle cards. So I just pulled card number 7 into the unknown. Trust and all will be revealed. So I want to read the card description for you because it is so fitting for this. It says, life is an adventure, and often new opportunities will arise that you won't know how to deal with. This is one of those times. You're required to trust that this new phase will reveal wonders and miracles as you step into unknown territory. Imagine that you are not only a pathfinder, but a path maker. Whatever you inquire, trust that you'll be safe. Stay aware as you discover new and marvelous territories and valuable treasures. What a great card for my first episode of 2020. Okay, so now that we've got that all covered, I am excited to jump into this episode. If you are not following me on Instagram, please follow me on Instagram at Medium in the Middle. And if you have not yet, please leave this podcast a rating and a review. It will really help me grow the podcast the more exposure I can get to it. So I appreciate that. If you are using iTunes, you just scroll to the bottom of the page and it takes 2 seconds to just leave a little 5-star rating and a little review would be amazing. I love to read them. All right, let's jump into this episode. I'm really excited to share this one. So, in today's episode, I am talking about a story that happened while I was at work. And this episode was actually scheduled for last year, but I was very nervous to release this episode because as we get closer and closer to my story, we're catching up to real life time. And this person is still in my life and I still see them all the time. So I felt that it was only appropriate that I asked their permission before I shared this story. As I mentioned in episode 1, I do change the names and I try to change the relationships and identities of the people I talk about in my podcast just to protect and respect their privacy. So I felt that it was really important that I asked this person if it was okay that their story, their experience become a podcast episode because it hit close to home and I wanted to make sure that she was okay with it. So after discussing with a friend about how I can change this episode to protect everyone's identity, we came up with a really good idea. So now I feel very comfortable in sharing this. So of course, all the details of the story remained the same and unchanged. I am only changing the location of where it happened and the names of the people involved. So let's jump into it. This story starts at work and where I was working at the time. And by this point, everybody knew about my mediumship stories. My podcast had just started. A few people at work listen. And I would tell the stories to people at work because somehow they just always come up. As much as I try not to bring them up in everyday conversation, they usually come up. I was at a Christmas party and 3 people at the Christmas party introduced me to other people as, hey, this is Steph and she talks to dead people and she has a podcast and kind of going on the whole spiel. And I was like, hi, nice to meet you. Like, I usually don't start with that, but yep. Of course, the person introducing me means no harm. They're like, that's so cool. And it's just like something we can all talk about. And I'm like, yeah, it is something we can all talk about. So needless to say, by this point in time, everybody that I worked with knew about my special gifts. We will call them that. I was working at a hotel and I worked front desk. So the entrance to the hotel, there was like this foyer area and it was off to the right-hand side of where the desk was. So for a while, I would kind of catch myself looking into the little foyer entrance and I swear I saw someone there. Like it was like a shadow was there or someone was walking in or I thought it was a guest. And I would constantly be turning my head. And this happened for about a week. And I was like, okay, I keep turning my head to see someone and no one's there. I think that it's actually like a spirit that's trying to communicate with me. So for the next week, I tried to figure out who this person was that would catch me in the corner of my eye because about 10 to 15 times per shift, I would like turn my head as if there was a guest walking in when there wasn't. And it was always the same kind of vibe and feel that I felt when this would happen. So after that first week when I was just kind of something in the corner of my eye, the second week I started to collect information. This spirit told me that they were a father of someone that I worked with. This person was not very tall, like maybe 5'8". They had dark hair and it was like thinning on the top. I could see a lot of hair on the sides of their head, like kind of near their ears, but not a lot of hair on the top of their head. And I could tell that I died of something of the chest, so it kind of felt like a heart attack, and it felt very sudden and unexpected. I just knew that I was trying to speak to my child that worked there. So I knew of one person that I worked with whose father was passed away, and of course this is a sensitive subject. We are all at work, so obviously no one wants to talk about this while they're working. And it'll throw off the vibe and the mood. And I really don't like to do that to people. I prefer to do it in private. But sometimes you don't always see people you work with outside of work. So a few days later, there was one girl who I know who lost her father. And we were all sitting after work. And I kind of said, hey, Susie, what did your dad look like? And she was like, why? And I was like, well, there's a father here and he's been here for about a week and I'm trying to figure out who he belongs to. So if you tell me what your dad looks like, then I'll figure out if this is him or not. And she's like, oh, okay. She said, well, he's really tall and he had short hair. And I was like, nope, nope, not him, not him. She's like, well, how do you know? And I was like, well, this person is like around my height, 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", like he's not over 6 foot. And he has long hair on the sides of his head. And she was like, oh, okay. She's like, well, then it's not my dad. So after that experience happened where I asked someone who it was, it kind of got around where there was a few other people sitting there and they were all saying, well, Steph, whose dad do you think it is? And I was like, well, I don't know. The only person that I knew whose father was passed away was Susie, and I don't know of anybody else whose father's passed away that we work with. So a few of the girls were all trying to think if there was anybody else, and none of us could think about anyone. And they were like, well, what if it's for, maybe our neighbors, or maybe someone who shares that door with us, or maybe it's for someone who works in the back. Like, did you ever think of that? And I was like, well, no, actually I didn't. I just assumed that because this person was right in the entranceway, that it was for one of us who worked up here. So they suggested that I ask the team in the back if this description meets anyone in the back. And just the idea of going to the back and asking if anyone on the team that works in the back of house, if it was one of their fathers, really was unnerving, because it's not something you really want to bring up. But after a little while, this spirit had been bothering me for about 2 weeks. I thought to myself, I need to ask, because clearly this spirit has a message to give and he's not going to leave me alone until I find out who his kid is. So it took me a few days to muster up the courage to go to the back of house and ask if anyone had lost a father. And I decided it would just be easier to go to the supervisor of the back of the house and ask him if he knew if anybody on his team had lost a father. I was like, instead of asking 10 people, I'll just ask one person, because he might just know that, oh, John lost his dad, so then I could just go tell John this information and not have to ask 10 people. So one day I mustered up the courage and I went to the back and I asked the supervisor, and I was whispering because we all are in a shared space, and I said, hey, so there's a spirit up front and it's a father, and I don't think it's for anyone in the front of the house, so I was just trying to see if maybe it's for someone in the back of the house. And he's definitely a skeptic, this person, so he was kind of like, what are you talking about, Steph? And I just explained that I had this man that kept getting my attention and making me turn my head when there was no one there, and it was kind of like a shadow that wouldn't go away. And he said, okay, well, what does he look like? So I described him. I said he's about my height, a little bit taller. His hair is long on the sides, shorter on the top. It's like a dark brown. He died of like a heart attack or something of the chest. It was very sudden. And he's like, well, no one back here has lost a father, but who you're speaking of sounds like my girlfriend's dad who passed away. He said, I never met him. I only saw a picture of him, but he looks like exactly what you're describing. He's like, maybe it's her. And instantly I felt the feeling of, yes, it's her. That's the person. And I thought, wow, like I didn't even know her father was passed away because she works in the front of house. And he said, yeah, he is. But don't tell her this information because she doesn't want to know and she's not going to believe you. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, could you maybe ask her if if I did have this information, if maybe she would be open to like hearing it? He said, okay, I'll try to like see if she'd want to know. He's like, but don't tell her because she'll be upset about it. He's like, let me ask her first and like do some feelers, and I'll try to kind of nonchalantly be like, hey, if Steph had a message for you, would you want to know? And let you know. So he was very clear not to tell this person until he had a chance to ask her. So I said, okay, that's a good plan. At least I know now who this soul belongs to, so I'll wait to deliver the message. So I will call this girl Joan. So for the next few shifts that I had to work with Joan, it was so hard not to tell her and not to ask her any questions. I was just waiting for her boyfriend to ask her if it was okay if I could tell her. And a few other people knew that it was her father too, because I had told them, and they said, have you told her yet? And I was like, no, like he said not to tell her, and he was going to ask her and kind of warm her up to the idea, but he hasn't yet, and I'm getting really nervous, and I kind of really want to tell her. They were like, well, like it's really not his choice if you tell her or not. I think you should just tell her. And I said, I know, but we're at work and I don't want to tell her at work and I don't want to just drop this bomb on someone who's unexpected. And he is right. Like, if you're not open to the message or you don't want to hear it, then it's not my job to just pour it on you. It's definitely different if a client is coming to me asking for a reading than if you're just working with me and I walk up to you one day and tell you about what your dad has to say. So this went on for another few more days. And then it got to the point where we're kind of at the 3-week mark where this dad was still bothering me from the front door. And I kept turning my head. And every time I turned my head, it was like a little annoyance because I was like, oh, like, I know you're still there and I know you have a message, but I can't deliver it yet. It's not time. So a few days later, I checked back with her boyfriend and I asked if he's asked her yet. And he said no, he hadn't gone around to ask her yet. And I was getting a little frustrated because I kind of had a feeling he wasn't going to ask her because he didn't believe and I didn't want him to necessarily make this choice for her. So then I kind of knew that I had to tell her, or I at least had to ask her if she wanted to know. So I just told myself that I would do it when we weren't at work. So I needed an opportunity when we were together, but not at work and alone and kind of private. And of course, a few more days passed and that perfect situation to tell her did not come up. After work one night, we all went to have a drink. And we were downstairs at the local pub and we were all having a drink and she was standing right beside me the whole night. And it was that feeling that I get, it felt like I had to throw up. I wanted to tell her so bad. So I thought to myself, okay, this isn't the perfect situation, but if we are alone tonight where like no one else is around us, I will tell her. So her boyfriend went to the washroom and it ended up that me and her were kind of alone. And I knew that this was my chance and I had to ask. So I said, hey, Joan, if I had a message for you, like, would you want it? Are you into that? Like, I don't know. I didn't know if I should tell you. And she was like, what do you mean? Like, a message for what? We had been drinking and it was like a long day of work and I just knew this wasn't the right situation, but I had to say it. And I said, well, like, I think I have a message from your dad. And her face goes blank. She stares at me. I see the tears filling her eyes and she said, what? I was like, yeah, your dad's been at work for 3 weeks now. We figured out it was for you. Is your dad, around my height, maybe a little bit taller, dark hair. It's thinner on the top, longer on the sides. He died of a heart attack suddenly. And she was like, yes, how do you know that? And I was like, he's been at work in the entranceway for 3 weeks. He's been trying to get my attention. And I didn't know that your dad was passed away. And by this time, she's crying. And I said, he's talking about a brother and a sister. And she said, yes. And she's like, I have a brother and a sister. And I said, okay. And then I was like, and is your mom getting remarried? And she's like, yeah, you know that. And I was like, okay. I was like, is there someone who's upset about the wedding? Like, I feel like someone is not happy about it. Your dad wants to tell this person that it's okay. Like, it's okay that this is happening. He doesn't want this person to be upset or angry, and everyone needs to live their life and be happy. And do you know who this person would be? And she said, yeah, that person is me. I'm unhappy about it. And I said, okay, well, your dad doesn't want you to hold this against your mom and it to affect your relationship. He really wants you to know that kind of it's fine with him and he wants you all to be happy. So then by this point, she's very emotional. Her boyfriend comes back from the washroom. Everybody on this point knows that I just told her. She was really emotional. She wasn't expecting it at all. I definitely flung it on her in an inappropriate situation. So she hugged and she thanked me for the message and she said, I really think I just need to go home. I wasn't expecting that. And she was crying. She said she hadn't cried over her dad in a long time and she maybe just really needed this release. And I said, okay, I'm so sorry. I just really needed to tell you and it's been so long. And she was kind of like, he's been at my work. Like, he knows where I work. And I said, of course he knows where you work. Like, he follows you. He watches over you. So she left and her boyfriend left with her too. And then I went back to the other people that we work with and they were kind of like, Steph, you shouldn't have done that. Like, this was not the good timing. And I was like, I know, I just really had to say it. And it was on the tip of my tongue. And I was just feeling so nervous. And I got that feeling. So then we decided to go to a different bar. So now we're at a different bar and I see Joan's sister. And Joan's sister walks up to me and she said, "Oh my God, I heard what happened with Joan. I can't believe our dad came through. Like, he's been at work. He knows where we work. This is incredible that you told her. I know that Joan wasn't really into believing you, but then this happened. She's like, I really believe you. And do you think he'll ever have a message for me?" And she was really happy about it. So this kind of it made me feel a little bit better because I'm like, okay, even though Joan was really emotional right now, the sister is happy to hear the message, so maybe it's okay. But by the next day, I was still really feeling bad about how I just sprung it on Joan while we're out with friends, and it was not the best timing to tell her. This was probably the worst time I've ever just sprung a message on someone. So I wrote her a message and I just said, "Hey, I'm so sorry for springing that on you, and I know it was bad timing, but I just really needed to tell you, and you really needed to know. If you want to talk about this more, we can. If you never want to talk about it again, we can also do that too, but I just needed you to know." It was the next day and everybody was calmed down, and she wrote me this really nice message back saying that she needed that cry and she didn't know that her dad would be at her work, and it made her feel really good, and it was bad timing, but she appreciated the message. So this was definitely a message that I gave where I didn't feel the best about it because I know that I made someone really emotional in a social situation. But it was a few weeks later, and Joan's aunt was visiting, and she came into work really frazzled, and she said, "Can I just come back in an hour?" And we weren't too busy, and I said, "Yeah, it's fine." She's like, "My aunt's visiting, and we were in this really big conversation, and I had to leave to come to work, and I really just want to go back and finish the conversation." And I said, "Okay, no problem. Come back in an hour." So an hour later, she comes back, and she's much more calm, and I could tell she feels better from whatever just happened. And she said, "So my aunt's visiting." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And she said, "My dad's sister." And I was like, "Oh." She said, "I told her what you had told me in the message and everything. And it was just this really emotional time." She's like, she really believes that stuff. And it was really nice for her to hear that message from her brother. And we were just having this really nice conversation about it. And then I had to come to work, but I knew you were working. So then I knew I wanted to go back. And she was like, "Thank you for letting me finish that conversation." And then after she told me that, I felt better about what had happened. I said, okay, if she's sharing with her aunt and her aunt is happy about this message and she was happy to share it and her sister was happy, I feel like it was kind of what I needed to do. And sometimes maybe the situations are going to be hard like this where I need to give someone a message. But I definitely learned a very important lesson that I cannot spring information on people like that. It's my responsibility to make judgment calls of when it's appropriate and where it's appropriate, and also that I don't always need to tell someone something, especially if they're not a client coming in my doors for this. If you are just someone I work with or someone I interact with, you're not asking for these messages, and I need to be very careful and aware of when and where I deliver them. So it ended up being a positive situation, but at the time I had a pit in my stomach for about 3 weeks. And now at work, I don't get that shadow anymore where I turn my head constantly during work. It's kind of the message has been said, the spirit no longer has to bother me, and this person can rest knowing that her dad is still around. So that is today's episode. I definitely try to control these random messages as much as I can, but they do still happen. And I still think that it's beautiful when spirit sneaks through to get a message for someone who maybe wouldn't go to someone like me to get it. So clearly it's really important, and it shows the connection between souls and how even after people pass away, there is still that connection. So thank you everyone so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We are back on a regular schedule, so every Tuesday I will be releasing a new episode. And please don't forget to leave a rating and a review. If this is your first time listening, welcome. We are far enough in my journey where you don't have to go back and listen to episode 1. If you don't want the whole story, these stories can now be kind of standalone stories if you don't want to know the beginning. But if you are interested in my entire journey, go back to episode 1 and listen from the beginning. I talk about the very first time this happened and my story leading up to today. I'm happy to be back on the microphone. I'm excited for what 2020 is going to bring, and I look forward to more episodes. Have a great week. Bye.